To analyze the mechanics of Emily Dickinson's most famous work, we have to look at the raw data. We are going to read Because I Could Not Stop for Death exactly as it appears in the Variorum edition, preserving every erratic capital letter and every original dash. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves, and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a spelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Dickinson brings us to the very frontier of human consciousness, detailing the precise transition from a living body to an eternal state. She achieves this by dismantling the mortuary tropes of her era. She frames the metaphysical journey not as a moment of terror, but as a quiet, civil appointment. To pull this off, she employs specific metrical and syntactic tools designed to collapse chronological time into a state of permanent suspension. Treating the poem as an intentional architecture shifts the analytical focus from Dickinson's biography to her technical precision, revealing a master structural mechanic at work. The opening stanza redefines the agent of mortality. Death is personalized as he. He does not arrive as a violent force. Because the speaker is too busy to stop for him, he kindly pulls his carriage over for her, acting as a civil, unhurried gentleman caller. In the congregational theology of 19th century New England, the transition out of life was steeped in dread. Calvinist doctrine heavily emphasized strict divine judgment and the looming threat of damnation. Dickinson's polite carriage driver stands in direct opposition to the terrifying Orthodox Calvinist specter of the Grim Reaper. Her era was also dominated by Victorian sentimentalism, a movement that relied on extreme emotional pathos and weeping deathbed scenes. Dickinson discards that hyper-emotionalism. The tone in the carriage is dry, stoic, and casual. The speaker willingly puts away her labor and leisure to match her driver's civility. By framing the metaphysical transition of death as a polite, domestic courtship, she subverts the two dominant theological languages of her era. To ground this transition, Dickinson builds the poem on a specific rhythmic foundation, common meter or hymn meter. This structure alternates strictly between lines of 8 syllables and lines of 6 syllables, 8, 6, 8, 6. The pattern is iambic, creating a predictable alternating structure of iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. This cadence originates in English hymnology, most notably in the work of Isaac Watts. In Dickinson's world, this rhythm was the bedrock cadence of Congregationalist worship. It was the sound of a community seeking salvation. The meter provided the comforting familiarity of a Sunday service, a rhythm that Dickinson then uses to explore the profound mystery of the grave. She manipulates the structural cadence of Orthodox religion, using the familiar hymn rhythm to explore existential uncertainty. As the carriage rolls forward, the spatial journey in the third stanza compresses an entire human lifespan into 3 distinct scenes. They pass the schoolyard, where children strive at recess. This maps to the active, earthly striving of childhood. Next, they pass the fields of gazing grain, which she uses to represent the heavy, fully realized plateau of adulthood. Finally, they arrive at the setting sun, the universal marker for old age and the immediate threshold of death. Then, in stanza 4, Dickinson executes a critical syntactic pivot, or rather, he passed us. With that single grammatical correction, the speaker's physical agency is stripped away. She is no longer moving through the living world. The living world is actively moving past her. This shift triggers an immediate tactile response. The imagery turns cold. Her gown is only gossamer. her tippet only tool, signaling the loss of physical warmth as the body is left behind. This stanza serves as the precise architectural boundary line where chronological time formally detaches from the subject. This temporal suspension is enforced by Dickinson's micromechanics, her highly debated capitalization, and her pervasive use of the dash. Editors have long argued over whether to regularize these quirks for modern readers. The critic John Crow Ransom believed her capitals were intentional mythopoetic devices designed to confer immense dignity on keywords. Conversely, scholars like R.W. Franklin have pointed out that these same capitals appear in her trivial domestic notes and recipes, suggesting they are merely idiosyncratic handwriting artifacts of the era. But the dashes are undeniably structural. Dickinson uses the dash to replace traditional final punctuation, like periods and commas. The dash operates as a marker of negative capability, a way of existing comfortably with uncertainty. Instead of closing a thought, the dash creates fluid bridges between clauses. It resists finality, keeping the narrative suspended in forward motion. Posthumous editorial attempts to clean up her punctuation disrupt this engineering. These corrections remove the temporal ambiguity that makes the poem function. The carriage finally pauses in the fifth stanza as they reach the house. Dickinson uses domestic metaphors to describe the grave, a swelling of the ground with a roof that is scarcely visible. This polite euphemism of a house softens the stark physical reality of a burial plot. The body rests, but the journey continues. The final stanza executes a massive time jump. The speaker reveals that centuries have passed since the ride began, yet to the speaker, those centuries feel shorter than the day. Earthly measurements of time have completely collapsed. Dickinson illustrates that once the threshold of eternity is crossed, chronological measurements cease to hold meaning. She captures the exact moment chronological sequence dissolves into a single, permanent present. Because the poem ends on this endless highway, its theological conclusion remains the subject of a deep academic divide. Interpretations span a wide spectrum, starting with the idea of orthodox salvation. And anchoring the other end is absolute existential agnosticism. Scholars like Dorothy Huff Oberhaus argue that the presence of immortality confirms the soul's survival, a secure journey toward a Christian heaven. Opposing scholars see a romantic skeptic. They argue the poem depicts a soul trapped in a suspended, silent void, traveling forever without a destination. The text offers no resolution. The driver, death, remains entirely silent at the end of the journey, offering no revelation to settle the debate. Dickinson is not acting as a theologian providing comforting answers. She is an analytical explorer, mapping the absolute edge of language and silence. The poem's enduring power lies exactly in this mechanical ambiguity, its ability to hold profound existential terror and strict domestic civility in perfect, permanent tension.